People who have cut other people out. What was the final nail in the coffin? Story 1. My mother, brother, and sister are all incredibly toxic people, but I never cut them out because they're family. Then the stuff really hit the fan when I was getting married. At our Jack and Jill party, my mother was taking tons of pictures, as expected, but they were of me and my brother, me and my dad, just me, my brother, and my dad, etc. She didn't want my wife in any of them. I spoke up and said that my future wife should be in these pictures. It's her wedding day too. My wife, who was understandably upset, walked away from the weird photography session. My wife and I decided to go to the backyard area and hang out with her cousin and stepbrother. My cousin and his girlfriend joined us. Things get more fun, we're joking around and having a good time. Then my mom and brother came outside extremely drunk. It was like 3 p.m. My mom starts taking more pictures without the bride in them. So I speak up again. My mom shushes me and slaps the back of my head. My wife then says my mom can enjoy her little family reunion photos and then goes back inside. I follow to make sure she's okay. I get into conversations with her mom, her aunt, and other family members of hers. We calm down and move on. We talked about getting ice cream at a place down the street. I go back outside to ask people if they want to get ice cream, as most weren't causing issues, just my mom and my brother. Before I say anything, my very drunk brother starts shouting, "Fuck your wife, fuck your family," and began charging at me, but was caught by my dad and cousin who held him back. He was, of course, kicked out. My mom left with him in tears. My dad, my parents are divorced and don't associate with each other at all, apologized to everyone and left out of embarrassment. Wedding day comes, my brother is no longer my best man and is not invited. My sister is here from the other side of the country. The ceremony goes perfectly. My sister refuses to attend the pictures being taken of the family and wedding party outside. During the reception, my wife, friends, some of my wife's family and I are busy dancing on the dance floor. We noticed my sister crying and walking around from table to table. We ignored it, as we expected her to try something dumb at our wedding. We found out from someone that my sister was trash-talking my wife in the bathroom. We don't want to deal with drama on our big day, so we have the person in charge of the wedding hall supervising. The reception staff talked to her about her behavior. She told us we could during the wedding planning process. My sister freaks out and acts all offended. She and my mom then staged a walkout protest of our wedding, taking a large majority of my aunts, uncles, and cousins with them. Not all, thankfully. To this day, it's been 4 years, I haven't spoken to anyone who walked out. Story 2. I cut my biological dad completely off because he just didn't try. When I was younger, I cut contact with him because he didn't believe me when I told him his new wife was abusing me and my sister. I petitioned for my parents' custody agreement to be changed and everything to protect me and my sister. We didn't see him again as a minor. When we were adults, he reached out to me and expressed regret at not being there for us and wanted to reconnect. We, me, sister, and him, met for dinner twice and then he just started not showing up. I stopped telling my sister we were even supposed to be meeting him because she was so disappointed that he flaked and just took her out myself, knowing he wouldn't show. I told him after like the 5th time that he clearly didn't care enough to even let us know he wasn't going to show, so I wanted nothing to do with him. He replied in some apologetic way, but I left him on red. Fast forward about 6 years, I got married and my husband has a lot of regrets about his estranged father dying before they could reconnect. So I reached out to my bio dad again. No plans were made to meet, but we did chat occasionally, until it became just me initiating conversation and him not ever reaching out to me first. I stopped sending him messages about 5 months after I got married. I've been married for 3 years and haven't even heard from him even once since. I guess the final straw was me realizing I was always going to put more effort into a relationship that I didn't need. Story 3. My parents are divorced and my brother and I were raised by our mom. My dad paid $100 a month for 2 kids and child support until we were adults. Mom let him pay that little. My brother died in an automobile accident at the age of 20. Everyone came to the funeral, including my dad. At the funeral, I overheard him talking to the other parents of the kids who were in the accident. My brother was the only fatality. He was talking about getting lawyers and who he was going to sue. Totally inappropriate behavior at a funeral, considering he made very little effort at being a father while we were growing up. He had a life insurance policy on my brother and me. He cashed it in and volunteered to take care of my brother's gravestone. 9 months had passed, and he still hadn't done anything except place the order. My mom ended up driving 5 hours to get the grave marker and paid for it. But the final straw for me was when he asked my mom for a refund on the child support that he had paid to my brother over his life. My mom paid him, which she should never have. He died last year from COVID. I have no regrets that he never met his only 2 biological grandchildren. For all I know, he would have taken life insurance policies out on them hoping to cash in. I went to the graveside funeral, left and drove 5 hours to get back home. I'm still blown away by all the wonderful things people were saying about him at the funeral. I didn't know that person. Story 4. My father is a narcissist and abuses drugs. Quite functional since he leeches off his family. My parents divorced almost 40 years ago. He never did more than take us every second weekend, and he usually spent the weekend locked in the bathroom doing drugs. So I didn't have a high-quality relationship. He spent most of my 20s into my 30s living with his mother as her caretaker. It wasn't great for my grandma, but she enabled so much of his behavior. I think he was the reason she died. The day she went into the hospital, my father said he was helping her dress, and she fell over, got hurt. Lying in a hospital bed, she got a bladder infection. That impacted her brain, and she went from mildly unstable to having most her faculties, able to walk, cook, talk at 90 to dead within 4 days of that fall. Based on my memories of how rough and aggressive my father would be to child me if I wasn't 100% agreeable when he was doing something like helping me put on a winter coat, I absolutely believe he shoved her and made the fall happen. Also relevant, he was closeted bisexual or gay, who knows, and had never dated since the divorce in the 80s, but lots of close best friendships with young males and young married couples that would last months or years, and then they would basically be dead to him. Anyway, crap went downhill after Grandma. He lost his home. He was 64, started to work for the first time in 10 years. When he moved in with his mom, he immediately stopped working, and she was healthy and super able, so it was leech behavior. 1 year after her death, he was quite destitute compared to his prior life. He was using so many drugs that he was so malnourished that he lost the fat pads on his feet that cushioned the bone from the ground. I didn't know this stuff. Then he attempted suicide in 2016, tried to gas himself, ended up in a psych unit. My sister and I and one aunt went to the family session for discharge planning. My sister and I discussed prior to the family session whether his drug use would finally be discussed. It wasn't. I was flabbergasted at the session. The social worker encouraged us to have compassion for his behavioral choice. Divorce was hard, and he was really struggling with a divorce. I said, "Divorce? What divorce?" The social worker legit went white and said, "Oh no, do you not know that your parents are getting divorced?" Me. Him? And Mom? Social worker. Yes. Me. That happened in 1987. I'm not trying to be rude, but I think the time for a crisis response to that loss has passed. And you know what? Drugs were never mentioned. After his discharge, I tried to be more available. He was starting to allude to moving in with me. He was back on his crap. Then I decided I didn't feel like I wanted to answer his call one night. Something I didn't realize until that night was that I was never allowed to not take his call. He went into a full-on narcissistic panic and called me every 5 minutes for 8 hours. I put my phone on silent and just watched. The next day I blocked his number and I've never heard a peep since. My sister did the same a few months later. I'm confident that I will learn of his death because my mother has one of my father's brother's wives as a Facebook friend. Father refused to ever use technology, so I'm safe that way too. Story 5. My brother is a coke, alcohol, and weed addict. Ever since we were teens, he was always doing crap that affected the whole family. He did stuff like steal stuff from some people who would then come looking to hurt him badly. He'd always hide and I'd have to deal with it. I got really good at fighting from a young age. As we grew older and I started working, I ended up paying his dealers off all the time to stop him from getting screwed up by them. When he was 19, he got a girlfriend who ended up with him for about 12 years. Turns out the girl was only 14. We only found out when she was 18. They had a kid together while both being cokeheads. Every week I would take them grocery shopping, help with their bills, etc. while she was pregnant, on top of the usual beating people up who came to start crap with him. When my nephew was born, I spent most of my free time there helping out, as the mother had developed postnatal psychosis and he was a lazy cunt. When my nephew was 6, my brother broke down crying to me about how broke he was. Said he couldn't afford Christmas presents or new clothes and underwear for the kid. He said this while rolling a joint from a big bag of weed. I loaned him $5,000 to get back on his feet. A lot of money for me at the time. I told him to pay me back 20 pounds a week until he could pay more. The final straw was at a family barbecue. He turned up with a load of weed, bottles of spirits, and a few grams of Who the hell thinks it's okay to do that around family? When he saw me, he came over and handed me 5 pounds and said, "Sorry, this is all I've got to spare." This is after 5 months of not getting a penny back from him. I just stood up and looked down at him, angry as hell, and I remember clearly saying, "You're not even worth hurting. Keep the money. I'm done with you." We haven't spoken in 7 years. Best decision of my life. Story 6. I'm the youngest of 7. My dad married 3 times. First marriage, 3 daughters. Second marriage, my sister and then myself. Third marriage, 2 grown stepsons. We had a massive schism in my family when I was 12 that resulted in my 4 sisters no longer speaking to my father, largely instigated by my half-sister, who I will call C. Consequently, I had no contact with most of my sisters or my birth mother for 15 years. After some rough teenage years, I went away to university, dropped out, and ended up back home. C had made some steps to make amends with my dad and adopted mother, so I tried to rebuild a relationship with her. Moved into an apartment where she lived across the back lane, so we would hang out once in a while and things were okay. She has bipolar disorder and frequently goes off her medication or combines it with alcohol, leading to violent outbursts. At one point, she and her then boyfriend were constantly getting into violent arguments, and I was doing my best to stay out of them. After one particularly bad argument, I bought her boyfriend a Greyhound ticket just to get them away from each other. She came over fuming and punched me in the face, breaking my nose. A couple of days later, I got an eviction notice as the only other tenant had complained to the leasing company. I was in a really bad spot and ended up sleeping on a friend's couch for 6 months. She offered to take care of my cat as I couldn't take him to my friend's place. Mid-February, on a negative 40 degrees Celsius night, I found my cat sitting outside the back of our store. She put him outside and forgot about him. And through some miracle, he managed to find his way to me. Despite this, I tried to maintain a relationship with her because I wanted to be in the lives of my niece and nephew. One year I bought them Game Boys for their birthdays, only to find out she almost immediately took them away and pawned them. Flash forward a few years, my 2 oldest sisters died a couple of months apart, and in the course of grieving, I was able to build a relationship again with my birth mother and another sister. She took it especially hard, and I did what I could to help her deal with it. I got really sick in 2014, and it turns out I had undiagnosed celiac disease. So I spent a year and a half barely being able to stay awake and being massively malnourished before I got diagnosed. My birth mother and sister were the only reason I survived. They brought me food and helped me navigate my way out of being on disability. In 2016 on her birthday, I was going to take my birth mother out for lunch. She messaged me in the morning that she wasn't feeling well and we'd have to do it another day. A few days later, when she wasn't answering messages and hadn't turned up at work, the police did a wellness check and she'd had a massive stroke and passed away. I sent C a message on Facebook breaking the news. She didn't respond all day. Finally, exhausted, I passed out around 2 a.m. Woke up several hours later to a flurry of messages with C freaking out because we were going to steal all our birth mother's money. She didn't have any and was actually heavily in debt. We started working on funeral arrangements and found out C had contacted the largest funeral home in the area and set up a very, very expensive funeral plan. C didn't have money either and had been on social assistance or disability for most of her adult life. She expected us to pay for it. None of us are very well off. After another flurry of Facebook messages accusing myself and my other sister, I told C she was a garbage person and I wanted nothing to do with her. We ended up getting Mom cremated and had a small service at the senior center she worked at. C and her now adult kids raided Mom's apartment and took basically everything of value. The only thing I took from her possessions was a cheap metal lighter. Story 7. After nearly 50 years of friendship, my idiot friend ruined a road trip and almost got us arrested in the process. It started a few hours into the trip when a really bad thunderstorm broke out. So bad that even with the windshield wipers going at top speed, it was really hard to see. He was driving, my car, in the left lane going 70 miles per hour, 112 kilometers per hour, and I asked nicely for him to slow down. He wanted to pass a huge semi on our right, which was sending up a wall of water, making it even harder to see. I asked twice more for him to slow down until I finally started screaming at him, to which he took offense. A few hours later, we pulled into a gas station in South Carolina. Friend pulls out his one-hitter and prepares to get high. We're in the South, in a state where weed is illegal, and there are rednecks parked on both sides of us. I told him to wait until we were away from all those people. He laughed and told me I was being silly. I had to basically throw a fit to get him to wait until we could drive somewhere quiet. Mind you, this is a man in his 60s, and he was acting like a rebellious 12-year-old. I pointed out that he was putting me and my car in legal jeopardy, which was not a risk I was willing to assume. Strike 3. At the end of the day, we stopped for the night at a crappy motel, a non-smoking motel with smoke detectors in the rooms. I had my back turned and he lit up in the motel room. Did I not make myself clear back at the gas station? So we get into a verbal altercation. He accused me of being a killjoy, paranoid, and seeing danger around every corner. I told him that a good friend respects the boundaries of their friends, and if it's a choice between the person who is willing to take a risk and the one who would prefer not to, you have to go with the one who doesn't want to risk their safety. He didn't agree with me. Unfortunately, this was a 10-day trip and we had a lot of driving to do. I was a real mess most of the time because he just didn't get why I was angry, and he wouldn't apologize. I almost dropped him off at an airport so I didn't have to drive back with him. After we get home, he kept emailing me trying to rekindle our friendship. After lots of emails back and forth, he finally sort of understood why I was so mad at him, and he apologized. But I practically had to dictate the apology and he just parroted my words, which appeared to me that he still didn't get it. And I don't need people like this in my life who don't respect reasonable boundaries and make me feel unsafe. Story 8. In my first year of university, I found out my mom had a lesion in the center of her brain, and the amount of fluid and pressure on her skull required immediate treatment. She was in the hospital receiving treatment for weeks while I tried to navigate my studies and living away from home for the first time. I was a mess of anxiety and stress for months. During this time, one of my very close friends continually got angry at me for not giving her enough attention, despite never contacting me to check on my mother's situation or how I was coping. But I was expected to check in on her constantly and initiate all contact. I just deleted her number and unfriended her. Story 9. Pretty tame compared to others here. A friend I had in high school and college became incredibly needy. We went to 2 different universities and lived in 2 different states and made a deal to call each other every week to catch up. They started to make poor decisions in their post-grad life, which became endless. Am I the conversations where I became their confessor and forgiver, but was never able to share anything about my own life. Things became bad for me, but despite me being there constantly for them, they couldn't return the favor. It came to a point where I got sick and missed one of their phone calls, and they started to call me incessantly while I slept. The kind where they call you 20 times in a 5-minute span and leave messages from caring and concerned, "Hey, where are you?" to "I hate you, you don't care about me." Crap. Anywho, I was given the ultimatum of either never speaking to them again or calling them back and begging for forgiveness. The easiest choice I ever made. 8+ years of friendship gone in an instant, and I never once felt bad or looked back. Story 10. I'd been friends with Sarah for about 15 years. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. She had keys to our house so she could pet sit when my husband and I were out of town. Over the years I'd known her, Sarah always told stories about personal drama and work drama. She got kicked out of her house. At the time, she said it was for running up a phone bill after she was told not to, so she moved in with my parents and me before I got married. Even stayed with them after I got married and moved away. Sarah eventually got married, moved halfway across the country, I was at her wedding too, then got divorced and moved back. She house sat for us when my husband and I took a week-long vacation. Something to know is that my house was extremely cluttered. I also don't care much about clothes, so it wasn't unusual to stop wearing stuff for months at a time and then go back to wearing it again later. Because of this, I would lose track of shirts and not think much of them. I also had t-shirts from trips I took that I didn't wear much at all because they had sentimental value. A few weeks after we got home from our vacation, a mutual friend named Rachel called me and told me that Sarah's mom had just told her the reason Sarah had gotten kicked out years ago was that she was a pathological liar. Several people Sarah would tell stories about didn't exist, or their position in her life was vastly different than what she portrayed. Rachel and I confronted her. She didn't realize we were there when she came home, and she walked into the house wearing one of the shirts that had an enormous amount of sentimental value to me. She admitted to the lies and to stealing clothes from me, mostly stuff that were Christmas gifts from my parents. She also had been stealing petty cash from my parents when she lived with them. I told her that she had been my best friend and that I would literally have given her the shirt off my back if she'd asked, but she'd betrayed my trust by taking it instead. It's been over 10 years and I haven't seen or talked to her since.